All right, wanted to do a quick comparison video. I actually don't know if how quick this is going to be. This might actually be a really long video because I like to ramble. But I'm going to do a comparison between the Blackmagic Pyxis and the Red Komodo X. Two of my favorite cameras to date right now. Like, I absolutely love both of the cameras. They both have their strengths and their weaknesses. And I kind of just wanted to talk about those. I've gotten so many questions about both cameras because I have both cameras and I've used both of them on paid gigs and my client work and stuff, and I just wanted to talk about those. Now, I do want to give some disclosures out there. First of all, the Red Komodo X I paid for with my own money back when it was announced. You can see it's, well, you might not be able to see, but it's a Stormtrooper. I bought it before the price drop. The Pyxis, on the other hand, was sent to me from Blackmagic Design. So big thank you to Blackmagic Design. They've been a very, really kind supporter of this channel, and they sent this out to me to kind of test and evaluate and make some content on. But that said, my goal is to be honest with you. I'm not going to sugarcoat things, and I'm just going to give my own opinion on both cameras. They both have their strengths and their weaknesses, and I just wanted to talk about some of those things in this video. Now, I'm going to cover the things in this video that I think are what most people are interested in. So if I leave something out, I do apologize, but let's keep the conversation going down in the comments. If you have questions about one of the cameras, definitely leave it in the comments below, and either me or one of the other lovely folks out on the internet might be able to chime in and answer. So that said, let's start off with the sensor size. The Red Komodo X is a 17:9 6K Super 35 global shutter sensor, whereas the Pyxis 6K is a full frame 3x2 rolling shutter sensor. Now, both cameras feature different lens mount options. So with the Komodo X, you have the option of an RF mount or a Nikon Z mount. Now, the Pyxis, on the other hand, you have 3 lens mount options. You can get L mount, a locking EF mount, or an REPL mount. Now, from a physical design perspective, they both have a fantastic box style shape with a bunch of mounting points all around the bodies, and that's really great for mounting accessories or to attach a cage or plates or anything like that, which I think is what most people do. It's certainly what I've done to really accessorize a camera out and put things exactly how you want it to really fit your workflow and attach whatever you want to the camera. Now, both cameras have monitors and controls on them, but they are in different places. So on the Komodo X, you have your controls and a little 2x2 or no, 3x3 monitor, something. I'll confirm that, on the top of the camera. That's where pretty much all of your controls are, with the exception of your power switch and record buttons that are on the side, on the AC side of the camera, and as well as on the front of the camera right by the lens mount. Now, the Pyxis, on the other hand, pretty much all of the controls and the monitor are on the operator side, the camera operator side of the camera, with the exception of the power switch, which is on the back of the camera on top, right above the battery plate. Speaking of the batteries to power the camera, the Pyxis has a Sony BPU style battery plate, whereas the Komodo X has an integrated V-mount battery plate. And both cameras do take CF Express Type B cards. The Pyxis has 2 CF Express Type B card slots, and you can actually record to an SSD via the USB-C out as well. Whereas the Red Komodo X has a single CF Express Type B slot, and there's no way to record to the USB-C out on the back of the Komodo X. All right, so that kind of leads me into some of the I/O on both of the cameras. So both of them feature a 12G SDI port, so that can send out a 4K 60 signal. Now, what's really cool about both cameras is they both have a dedicated video out terminal in addition to the SDI out, so you can free up your SDI for a client monitor or something. So on the Komodo X, that video out terminal is through the little pogo pin connection on the top of the camera right above the monitor. And on the Pyxis, you have a USB-C video out terminal to be able to utilize something like the Pyxis monitor for the Pyxis or the DSMC3 monitor on the KOMODO X. I have both, and both are fantastic monitors. Now, the other cool thing on the KOMODO X is you actually have an additional video out terminal technically through the USB-C. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to connect your phone, either Android or iPhone, to be able to utilize as an actual monitor. Now, you can also monitor the KOMODO X without any USB-C cable and just do it through Wi-Fi, through the app, through the same app. And I gotta say, like, the Red app is hands down the best application for a camera. Now, one thing that's unique with the Pyxis is it has an Ethernet port on it. It is 1 gigabit per second, I believe, but that allows you to connect it for camera to cloud, or what I've used it for actually, and I made a video on this, is actually to transfer footage. I've had a CF Express card for some reason not mount to any card reader, but it was able to connect via the Ethernet, and also I think the USB-C as well. And I was able to offload the footage that way. So that was actually kind of a lifesaver. And both cameras also have DC inputs. I probably should mention this when I was talking about powering the camera, but they both have DC inputs to power the camera, either off of mains power or from a D-tap battery. Now, as for audio, both cameras do support multi-track audio recording. The KOMODO X can do up to 4 channels of audio. 2 of those channels are the internal mic, and then the other 2 channels can be used with the 5-pin audio input. What I've done is I purchased the mid 49 5-pin to XLR, so I can have 2 XLR units or inputs on the camera, and it actually does provide phantom power, which is really cool, and the preamps do sound really good on the KOMODO X. Now, the Pyxis, on the other hand, can do 2 channels of audio, and you have the option of the mini XLR on the front or the 3.5mm input on the back of the camera, or obviously you can opt to use the internal microphone for scratch audio. What I've done, again, I purchased the XLR, full-size XLR adapter from mid 49. One goes into the front of the camera for the mini XLR, and then the other goes into the 3.5mm terminal on the back. But both cameras can provide phantom power through XLR, which is really good, and both cameras have really good sounding preamps. Now, as for timecode, the KOMODO X utilizes an EXT port, which I pretty much use just for timecode, but you can use the EXT port for a myriad of other things like Genlock and other things. Whereas on the Pyxis, it has a dedicated timecode BNC port, which is definitely more of an industry standard compared to the EXT port on the KOMODO X. All right, now for sensor formats, this is where things start to get really interesting. So they share a lot of the similar sensor formats, like 6K, 16:9, 17:9, 240:1, and 4K, 16:9 and 17:9. But there are definitely some notable differences between the 2 cameras. The big one with the Pyxis being it can record in open gate, in 3x2 open gate, which is really cool. It's not quite a square, but gives you the ability to have a much taller frame. So if you need to pull a vertical frame, you're just gonna have more height than you would with a 16:9 sensor. But it also has other formats natively, like 6x5 and Super 35 4x3. Now, the KOMODO X, on the other hand, has some really great sensor formats that I really like using as well. One being 5K, 16:9, 17:9. That allows you to bump up in frame rates, which we'll talk about in a second. And then you have the 6K 2x1, which is really great. Now, as for frame rates, here's a chart that I put together that seemed like it was the best way to kind of show some of the frame rates. Long story short, if you are looking for high frame rates, the KOMODO X is the clear winner here. Now, as for anamorphic shooting, they both have quite a few anamorphic modes, but I would probably give the edge to the Pyxis because of its 3x2 open gate recording. It just gives you more options for anamorphic lenses to utilize depending on the format that you are trying to deliver to. Actually, one of my favorites is in the Super 35 4x3 mode with my Nanomorph prime and zooms. you actually get a 2:1 aspect ratio natively because they're a 1.5x lens on the 4:3 aspect ratio. But the Komodo X has a ton of different aspect ratios as well for anamorphic shooting. So, but I do think the Pyxis kind of takes the lead, kind of wins out on that one because of the 3:2 sensor format that it has, as opposed to the 17:9 sensor on the Komodo X. Now, as for the actual recording, the codecs are quite different. So the Pyxis records in Blackmagic RAW as well as H.264 proxies that are 8-bit 420 proxies. Really cool that it does that just in camera right off the rip, so that if you are sending stuff to remote editors or just have a machine that doesn't handle B-roll, which I don't know of any machine out there really that struggles with Blackmagic RAW, but you at least have the ability to upload proxies super easily to a remote editor or something to be able to do that way. And Blackmagic RAW is a fantastic codec. These two are my favorite codecs to work with just because of the flexibility that you get. Now on the Komodo X, R3D, Red Code RAW, it's kind of an industry standard when it comes to codecs. Both great raw codecs. I'm not going to get into one's real raw and one's whatever. They're both great, and everybody watching this probably won't ever see a real substantial difference between the two codecs. Now, one other benefit to the Komodo X is it actually does record internal ProRes and a bunch of different ProRes flavors. So if you have a need to send out ProRes as opposed to RAW for some reason, then you can do that with the Komodo X. I've never been requested ProRes on the Komodo X, but you do not get ProRes on the Pyxis. So that is something that you should definitely consider. If you need ProRes, you're definitely going to need to use an external recorder. All right, now the stuff that probably most people actually want to know, and it's taken a long time to get to here, but let's talk about the image. Now, the image on both cameras are fantastic. I can't say one is better than the other simply because from an image quality standpoint, simply because they're just different, but they both look so good to the point where I would not want to get rid of either one of them because they just have their own look, and depending on the project, I would choose one over the other. It really kind of boils down to that. Now, there are some notable differences between the two that I do want to talk about. The first thing has to do with low light. And when I actually did a side-by-side test, and to my surprise, the Komodo X kind of blows the Pyxis out of the water. And that is at the second base ISO circuitry of the Pyxis 6K. So on the Pyxis, you have a dual base ISO. They state it as 400 and 3200, but actually if you hit 1250, then that's when it actually cleans up. So between 1250 and 1600, you don't really notice that much of a difference. On the Komodo X, there's no dual base ISO. I think the only red camera that does that is the Gemini. But to my surprise, the Komodo X is so much cleaner in the shadows compared to the Pyxis 6K. I don't know if YouTube is going to show this justice with the compression and whatever else they do to compress the video, but looking on my timeline, there is a noticeable difference in noise in the shadows in this shot compared to the Komodo X. Now, moving on to dynamic range, and this one's kind of interesting, and it's so tough to compare because you really should compare like all the different ISOs, because the way that R3D works, and honestly Blackmagic RAW up until the next circuitry, is the higher the ISO you go, or the lower the ISO you go, that kind of shifts the middle gray point. So it kind of dedicates more dynamic range to either the shadows or the highlights. But I would say like in like an ideal situation, if you rate both of the cameras at 400 or even 800, they're going to be pretty neck and neck. Like there's really no massive difference between the two. In this comparison right here, I've got the Red Komodo X and the Pyxis kind of side by side, really tried to match the framing as best as I could. Honestly, when you grade it, you really can't tell a difference between the two cameras, with the exception of some color differences. I didn't really manipulate the colors. This was just a color space transform, and that was it. Maybe I boosted the shadows a little bit on both just because the color space transform made it really, really contrasty, but that's it. The only difference I noticed was the little light in the background, and when I clicked the highlight recovery button on the Pyxis in DaVinci Resolve, it actually kind of recovered that information, and it looks like there's more detail in that light on the Pyxis as opposed to the KOMODO X. Now, if you look at this little outside comparison, and you got to forgive me, like I'm super limited on time with how busy work is and stuff, but I try to get this comparison to show you. This is both rated at ISO 800. 800 is a great outdoor ISO for the Pyxis and a lot of other Blackmagic cameras. Even though it's rated for 400 as a base ISO, outside I prefer to hang around 800 because it's a better balance of highlights and shadows, and the highlight roll off is a little bit better. But at 800, honestly, I really can't tell that much of a difference between the two cameras. I think it'd be hard for anybody to tell the difference. I sent a couple side-by-side shots to a couple of buddies of mine, and they couldn't tell the difference. They're like, yeah, I mean, some colors look a little different, but like they look identical. And here's like a real world example of using the two cameras in an actual like paid gig for an interview for a project that I was working on for a client of mine. And you can see here, like, you'd be hard pressed to tell the differences between the two and be able to identify like, oh, that's definitely the Blackmagic, but that's definitely the Red. And that goes to show the strengths of both cameras in normal, properly lit scenarios. I think when you start to see the extremes of like low light or stuff like that, that's where I think the KOMODO X really shines. And especially when you put on a focal reducer, that's where the KOMODO X even starts to shine even more. But for like daylight interior, daylight exterior, there's no real quantifiable difference in my opinion. And this is just my opinion. Like, I am just a guy on the internet that makes videos about cameras. So like, take this with whatever grain of salt that you want to. Rent both cameras to see if they actually fit your needs or confirm or whatever that I'm talking about. All right, I want to wrap this video up. This is probably a super long video already, but if this has been helpful for you so far, hopefully this next section talking about the user experience of these cameras will be helpful to you as well. Everyone's experience will be different. Everybody's needs and workflow are different than mine, but I just want to share my experience with these cameras. Hopefully this will help you out in your either purchasing or renting decision for your next project or for your kit. All right, let's start off with the KOMODO X. First up is the app. The phone application, and I have it for the for iPad and stuff too. It is hands down the best app that I've ever used for any camera. Monitoring everything, controlling all the settings, triggering record, all that kind of stuff is incredible. And if you have a really good Wi-Fi network, then that makes the experience even better. You set it up into infrastructure mode and connect to the same network as your phone, connect the camera to the same network as your phone, and it is really a seamless operation. It is such a good app. And if you are out and about, you can set up an ad hoc mode and then monitor it wirelessly. You can even put it on your camera and use it as a monitor without having to connect any cables. There is a little bit of latency when you do that, but if you connect the cable, then that latency goes away. It really is that awesome of an app. I wish all camera manufacturers would invest time and R&D into creating an app, because Red definitely wins the cake on that one. Now, next up are the customizable record buttons. This is something that's really cool about the KOMODO X. So there are technically 4 record buttons on the KOMODO X. There are 2 physical locations, but the buttons have a half press and a full press, and you can actually customize the half press and full press to pretty much any sort of function that you want. There are so many different ways of customizing those record buttons to make it a more custom experience for you as the camera operator. And if you have the DSMC3 monitor, which is made by Small HD, fantastic monitor, albeit very expensive, you have custom buttons on there as well. So you technically have 8 custom function buttons that you can assign for the Komodo X, and that makes life as an owner op on the Komodo X really just like a very custom experience, and you can set it up exactly how you want, which is really cool. The Z mount on the Komodo X is something else that's really cool. Not only is, can you use Nikon lenses, but you can actually adapt Sony E-mount lenses to it as well, which is a really unique feature. And you can do things like change the focus on the mirrorless lenses, like the Nikon lenses, from focus by wire to linear focus, which is really cool. It's not something you can do with the RF lenses, which is why I don't use RF lenses on the Komodo X. It's just not a great experience. And the autofocus is continuously improving with Nikon's acquisition, so I anticipate the autofocus to get even better as time progresses, so that's really exciting. Now, some things I don't really like about the Komodo X. Number one, the boot up time is super long. It takes forever to boot up the camera. I mean, it's not as bad as the old DSMC2 cameras, which felt like the camera was operating on Windows 98, but it still takes a really long time to boot up. Now, once it's booted up, like the menus and everything are nice and snappy, but if you're in a run and gun situation, dock style shooting, like that is something you actually have to keep in mind and really consider before your shoot. Like, do you want to, honestly, you can hot swap batteries, and that's like usually what I do instead of powering the camera down, because it takes that long to power up and power down. So that's annoying. The other thing is, although I love R3D, I hate the file structure with Red Code RAW. It puts it all in a bunch of different folders, and it's just like Blackmagic RAW's file structure is so much better, and that's a great segue into the user experience with Blackmagic. First of all, is Blackmagic RAW. The file structure of Blackmagic RAW is so much better from a user experience standpoint than R3D. You have all of your video files, B-RAW just listed, and then you have your proxy folder right there, and that's really cool. And the fact that it actually records proxies in camera, something that the Komodo X cannot do. The boot up time is another thing. Then this really applies to pretty much all Blackmagic cameras that I've owned and used. The boot up time is like seconds. Like, it's a fraction of the time it takes for the Komodo X to boot up. So if you are in a run and gun situation, doing battery swaps and stuff is really not that big of a deal, because you just power the camera down, swap the battery, and then you're off to the races again. And honestly, the price point is incredible. You can get 2 Pyxis 6Ks with the Pyxis monitors for the price of 1 Komodo X. And if I were just starting out and I didn't have any cameras and I was looking to get a camera system, or if I had just like a mirrorless camera, I was looking to get into the cinema camera world, I would probably opt to get 2 Pyxis than 1 Komodo X, because 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So anyways, those are my thoughts. That's how I feel about both the cameras. Hopefully those comparisons were helpful to you. There's like such a small chance that you're even still here. So this is me talking to myself. If you are still here, then name your favorite football club in the comments below, or for those of us in the US, soccer club. I'm repping the Charleston Battery. It's where my sister worked before she passed. And yeah, we love the Battery. But that's it. Hopefully this video was helpful to you. I will leave links down in the description below if you feel so inclined to purchase one of these cameras. If you do, I will greatly appreciate it if you use the affiliate link. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it does help this channel out. I do get a small commission from the sales. And if you are still here, then clearly I've done something right, and hopefully I have earned your subscription. So be sure to go subscribe down below and ring that notification bell and like the video and leave a comment.